Week 7 of the fantasy football season. Here's a few tight ends I looked at off the wire this week. The first tight end, Harold Fannin Jr. of the Cleveland Browns. David Njoku, he left in the second quarter with a knee injury in that loss at the Pittsburgh Steelers. And Harold Fannin, we saw some good flashes from him early in the season, where he was the tight end the rest of the game in the second half. He had a big ball game versus Steelers defense. So the last few weeks for Fannin, week 4 at Detroit, a carry, 1 yard in that one, 2 catches, 24 yards, 6 targets. Week 5 versus Minnesota, 4 catches, 13 yards, a touchdown, 4 targets. In week 6 at Pittsburgh, the big game, 7 catches, 81 yards on 10 targets. And the Joker, we'll see if he's going to play in week 7 or not. He tried getting back into that game versus Pittsburgh, but couldn't do it with the knee injury. And Fannin, he had some good games early in the season, and now back on the radar. And this week, a good matchup coming up versus the Dolphins, a defense that can't stop anyone. Give up the 8th most fantasy points to tight ends on the season, and Dylan Gabriel and Fannin all preseason and training camp work with the second team, so they definitely got good rapport. And a young quarterback security blanket is in position to coming off a good game and put up numbers, and possibly Njoku out. Fannin definitely an ad this week, and he's out there in 75% of fantasy leagues. Next tight end, Chig Okonkwo of the Tennessee Titans. Okonkwo's had a couple decent games here and there over the last few weeks, and now with Calvin Ridley possibly out a few games after he left with the hamstring injury in week 6 at the Raiders. Okonkwo's going to get more targets, and obviously Cam Ward, a rookie quarterback, is going to rely on the security blanket tight end position. The last few games for Okonkwo: week 4 at Houston, a catch, 4 yards. Week 5 at Arizona, 4 catches, 48 yards on 5 targets. And week 6 at the Raiders, 6 catches, 46 yards on 6 targets. So this week, a good matchup on paper versus New England that gives up the 5th most fantasy points to tight ends on the season. And we know Tennessee is going to be trailing most likely early and often. New England's playing great football, beating Buffalo, then going into New Orleans, beating them as well. And now this week coming into Tennessee. But Okonkwo, we saw a few flashes from him a few years ago. We went out there and made plays. And now, obviously, if Calvin Ridley's going to miss time, he's going to get more targets coming his way, and he's available right now in tons of fantasy leagues. In 76% next tight end, A.J. Bonner of the Seattle Seahawks. A.J. Bonner, he's been a nice piece in this offense this season. And him and Sam Darnold have a good rapport, available in 87% of fantasy leagues, and 3 weeks in a row with double-digit fantasy points in PPR leagues here for Bonner. Week 4 at Arizona, 3 catches, 32 yards, a touchdown. Week 5 versus Tampa Bay, 7 catches, 53 yards, 2 touchdowns, 7 targets. In week 6 at Jacksonville, it was a quiet game most of the ball game till the fourth quarter. He caught a 61-yard pass and tried running it to the end zone with Bonner, but got stopped. So Bonner's making plays, big red zone targets. Sam Darnold spreads that football out, but arguably his number 2 option in the passing game is Bonner, where Cooper Kupp pretty much has been non-existent all season long, and obviously Jackson Smith-Njigba easily the number 1 option in this offense, and also one of the better receivers in all fantasy football. But Bonner, 3 games in a row, like I said, double-digit fantasy points. Definitely a tight end to add this week. Next tight end, K. Dotton of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So we know Micah Buka, he's going to miss some weeks with a hamstring injury. And Chris Godwin already, he's not going to play in week 7 for this Tampa Bay Buc team. Mike Evans are going to see if he could give it a go this week and hopeful in practice. But K. Dotton, the last couple weeks with the injuries piling up in this receiving room, he's getting more targets, and he's a big target as well. 6'5", 6'6", can work the end zone. Big third down guy he could be for Baker Mayfield. In the last few weeks, like I said, numbers and targets have gone up. Week 4 versus Philly, 3 catches, 9 yards, 4 targets. Week 5 at Seattle, 4 catches, 81 yards on 5 targets. And week 6 versus the Niners, 5 catches, 51 yards on 6 targets. So let's say Evans, Godwin, and Abuka are out. We're already Godwin and Abuka are going to be out in this week 7 game at Detroit. It could be down to K. Dotton and the young guys, and Tez Johnson, Cameron Johnson, and Sterling Shepard, obviously the only veteran left in the receiving room who are going to play for this Tampa Bay Buc team. So K. Dotton, he's going to get peppered with targets if they got to go with the 2 Johnsons and Shepard in the receiving room. And if it is Mike Evans' return in this game, still I think K. Dotton could step in and be that number 2 option in the passing game. So either way, like I said, with Godwin and Abuka not playing in this game in week 7, K. Dotton's going to work his way into production and get some targets in this ball game, and he's available in 88% of fantasy leagues. Next tight end, Michael Mayer of the Las Vegas Raiders. Mayer out there, 98% of fantasy leagues. Obviously, Brock Bowers now missed the last 2 ball games with injury, and Mayer, he missed week 5's game with a concussion, but came back in week 6, had a nice game, 5 catches, 50 yards, and a touchdown on 7 targets. So week 7, another matchup at Kansas City where they could be trailing early and often, obviously, is this Vegas Raider team. And also with a bye in week 8, I think there's a good chance that Brock Bowers sits this one out and then comes back week 9 healthier, where Michael Mayer had a good game last week and they won the ball game with Vegas. That's definitely a possibility. He was a high draft pick a few years ago, and then obviously they got Brock Bowers in the NFL draft in 2024 with this Vegas Raider team. But I know it was an easy matchup in week 6 versus Tennessee, but he showed yard after catch ability. He found the end zone. Him and Geno had some good rapport. And if Brock Bowers is out, I think he's a decent plug-and-play ad this week in a game where they're going to be chasing points at Kansas City. And the final tight end, Ron Gatson of the Los Angeles Chargers. So Gatson, I think his targets obviously went up with Quentin Johnston out. And the Chargers were going up and down the field in this game in week 6 at the Miami Dolphins. In week 7, pretty good matchup versus Indianapolis. Their defense isn't all that great, and we just saw Trey McBride come off a big game versus them. But if Quentin Johnston's back in the lineup, obviously Gatson targets are going to go down, with Lad McConkey stepping up once again over the last few weeks. Keenan Allen still going to get his targets. And even Kamini Vidal did some work out of the backfield catching the football. So the last few games for Gatson, week 4 at the Giants, 2 catches, 16 yards. Week 5 versus the Commanders, a catch, 14 yards. And week 6 in Miami, 7 catches, 68 yards on a fumble loss on 8 targets. So that's good volume, 8 targets, and catching 7 of them for 68 yards, but a fumble loss. So he's a rookie as Gatson. He could go out there and make some plays. We saw it in week 3 versus Denver. We had 9.60 fantasy points. But like I said, if Quentin Johnston's back in this game, just a player that had a good game in Miami in week 6. But anytime someone comes off volume and good production like that, especially at a tight end position that's hit or miss most weeks than not, he's someone to keep an eye on, and he's available in 99% of fantasy leagues. That's a few tight ends I looked at off the wire for week 7 of the fantasy football season.